Hello, welcome, welcome. We're going to give people a few minutes to trickle in, but welcome to our webinar today. As the webinar goes along, feel free to add your questions to the webinar chat. Make sure that you are selecting not just host and panelists, but everyone. That way everyone can see the questions and we can have a bit of a chat as we go along in this webinar. And at the end, we're going to be sending you guys the materials and, of course, the recording so you can review, share with your team, and discuss further. Alrighty, we have already a good big group, so I'm going to hand it over to Nelly, who is going to be doing the webinar today.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian. Great to see you all here. Thanks for coming for this webinar on how do we do an AI and data-driven approach to leading transformation. And I'm going to start with a caveat. I'm going to use change and transformation a bit interchangeably during the presentation. I know they're different, but sometimes similar in many companies. So change and transformation work, we're kind of bundling it together for the purpose of this webinar. My name is Nelly Wartoft. I am the founder and CEO of Tigerhall. Tigerhall is a change activation platform that helps large enterprises drive change activation at scale. So we solve for three problems. How do we land the change? How do we land the transformation with people for everyone to know what's going on and what is expected of them? Making sure the message comes across. How do we enable transformation leaders to know what's going on, getting the right insights and data for their decision making? And how do we give teams time back for more high value activities? So that's the platform that I started 6 years ago. Today we are in 12 markets around the world and have users in 32 countries. And today we're going to chat about AI and data in the role of change and transformation. And I think all of you are no strangers to this, how much more change is happening today compared to just 10 years ago. So if we look at the average number of change impacts per employee per year and look back towards 2014, 2015, it was like 1 to 2 changes happening that every employee experienced per year. Then fast forward to 2024, that number had tenfolded. So 10 times the number of changes just 10 years later. And suddenly it's more than 1 change per month that every employee is going through. So some of you have seen me talk about this before, how it's change is going up and up and up, and it's not going to stop, right? It's just going to go even further and accelerating faster from here. So this is the background to why do we need to change the way that we drive change and transformation. We cannot just continue to out-hustle the way that change is growing exponentially and keep doing this manually, because that is still what many are doing today. So looking at how change and transformation teams operate today, if we take a week in the life of a change team, it's around 27.4 hours every week that is being spent on manual tasks per team member. And that goes into areas like creating and sending stakeholder communications, managing all of those spreadsheets, all the Excel sheets that we're all running around with, coordinating the meetings, the follow-ups. How do we manually annualize survey results, producing status reports for the steer co? All of this takes a lot of time. And when you're doing a lot of manual work, it's not just time that you're losing, right? It's all of the opportunity cost around the transformation, how we're delaying that transformation. So the big question then becomes, how do we lead this much change and this much transformation faster and at bigger scale in 2025? And this is where the role of AI and data comes in. So what we're going to talk about today is how can we use AI and data to help us tackle this amount of change and transformation? And it's not about AI for the sake of AI, right? Like that's been very much the wave over the last 2 to 3 years. Everything is like, oh, what's our AI strategy and AI here and AI there? And it's not about AI for the sake of AI. It's about what can we leverage it for to help us do our jobs better. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to start with a bit of the landscape. Where do we stand today with both AI and also AI agents, which is coming in a lot this year and going into next year? What are the top 6 most high leverage workflows that we can tap in for AI and data in change and transformation? What's the data strategy? What is the data we need to get access to successfully leverage it? Agents. I'm curious to see in the chat if anyone is using agents. Have you deployed agents? Where are you all at with that? And then we're going to cover some red flags and pitfalls and also looking at the human element and where Where do we still have a human in the loop? And then how do we get started? So if we start with looking at where we stand in 2025, where we're currently at in this landscape, right? You all know this, how AI, the inflection point, reached that when it was 2021, like November, December, when ChatGPT came out more mass market, and just how quickly it's all taken off since then. More multimodal capabilities with much larger context windows that allows these LLMs to operate at much greater capabilities. And that is why we're seeing this exponential change in just the development and the capabilities of AI. And 2025 is the year of agent networks. So many of you have probably started to look into agentic AI networks. How do we start building that out? So that's where we're currently at from an inflection point. And the core of this is data. And many of you might think, and this is a common myth, that we need structured data, and that to leverage AI well, you need really structured data. And that is a myth. You don't actually need structured data. You need high quality data. You need accurate data, because the truth is still that garbage in, garbage out. So that hasn't changed with AI either. But you don't need for it to be structured. If someone tells you that you need structured data, they're probably going to sell you a structured data platform, and that's their purpose of telling you that you need structured data. But actually, unstructured data is why AI is so powerful, because it can make sense and make use of all of that unstructured data. And if we look at where does data live today in large enterprises, is actually 80% is unstructured. So you have all of this data in Teams and Slack conversations, all the meetings, all the communication channels, everything that is happening across your enterprise. In knowledge work, right? It's all about communication, content, the written word, the spoken word. That's all unstructured. So 80% of the data that you can use for AI is unstructured. So you don't need to freak out about, we need structured data, we need it to be perfect and perfectly put together. You actually don't need that. You just need to know, how do you best leverage the unstructured data? And this is what is making this new stack for transformation possible, the fact that we have so much data at our fingertips. So how do we get the right one, which we'll chat about later, and then building that data foundation. So getting access to data is the very first step. So if you haven't started on that, that's where I would recommend to begin. Is looking into what are the data sources that you can tap into, how can you build your data lakes, and how can you build this entire ecosystem where you have access to data. This is usually where the problem starts. And many change and transformation leaders that I speak with, they don't really have access to the data in the first place. And if you don't have access to it, very difficult to do something about it. But it allows us to build that foundation. Then on top of the foundations, that's where we build the application layer of AI solutions, agents, and so on. And then what you get out of that is the analytics layer that actually gives you the output and the analysis of what is happening. And that is what allows you to make decisions and course correct and run the transformation. And because we have this large amount of unstructured data, we now can make this stack possible. But before we go into implementing all of this AI technology, data, and so on, it is a mindset shift that is required to make this successful as well. And it's going to be really hard to apply AI successfully if we're still thinking like we're in the manual world, right? And the more like project ownership mindset. And I still see many change teams operating like this. It's very much about the manual oversight, it's tactical execution, it's very linear workflows. It's this like project mindset of that change has a start and a finish and it's end to end, and we run it like a linear project. And if you just take that the way that you've always done it, and then you just include more like AI on top of it, you're not really going to see as much benefits as if you're redesigning the entire workflow from the beginning. So rethinking, what do we do entirely different now? And co-creating new workflows together with AI rather than just taking it and applying it to things that you've always done. So this mindset shift of thinking of yourself more as a system designer and thinking of it as an architect type of role, and thinking, how can you orchestrate these systems? How can you architect the systems and get this real-time intelligence that actually AI and data can give you? But it does require us to move out of that project, start and end, project planning type of mindset, and think about it more as it's continuous transformation, it's always on. How do we become those system architects instead of the project managers? So that's where we need to start. And once we've made that mindset shift, where does it actually help? what are the top use cases where AI and data can actually help within change and transformation? These are the 6 that are the highest leverage in our view and our experience, where change and transformation can actually leverage AI and data successfully. You have the communication and training piece. And this is a high leverage use case because of how much time and manual workload it takes to run this at the moment. All the content creation, the translation, the distribution, all of that, very prime for AI. Sentiment analysis, change load mapping, stakeholder management, campaign planning, transformation planning and decision making, or others. And across all of these, what you're seeing is, again, coming back to that unstructured data and how valuable the unstructured data is for change and transformation. Because I think what is interesting is that when we think of change, right, it's so much about the people. It's about the people, the mindsets, the behaviors, and what are people? We're unstructured. Humans are so unstructured. There's nothing structured about human beings. And the fact that we now have data about that human unstructuredness is what enables workflows like sentiment analysis and stakeholder management and change load mapping. Those use cases is where it's very beneficial to tap into all of that unstructured data to actually pull out insights that we weren't able to do before, or it required a lot of these one-to-one manual interventions to even get that data and then input in an Excel sheet. So if we look at these 6, and let's go one by one and see how do we actually do these in practice. So starting with content creation. This is one that I think is the absolute lowest hanging fruit around how do we create content faster. And with Gen AI, you can create content in so many different formats from just one single input. So thinking about your source content, this might be a strategy deck or a guide, or like think you have like a 150-page PowerPoint deck around everything about this transformation, right? That one piece of source content with applying Gen AI to it and processing it can actually generate multiple outputs, all the different formats, reading, watching, listening in all the different languages as well. So it's become much, much easier to do localization. And for those of you who work in global organizations, you know, the amount of time and money it takes to localize and sending something from headquarters to the local regions, and they localize it, and you have translation agencies, and so much time and cost goes into localization. Entirely goes away with AI. So very, very big use case of getting the right languages, the right translations, but also the not just geographical language, but also language comparing, for example, blue-collar workers and white-collar workers. The amount of personalization that you can do from a tonality point of view, from a vocabulary point of view, something that we see is very effective is the vocabulary personalization. So for example, if you create a podcast, you can feed the Gen AI with this is a team meeting, for example, from this team. And the AI will then pick up what is the vocabulary that they use, how do they talk to each other, how do they interact, what is the terminology they're using, and then using that in the podcast audio output. So making sure that it's speaking their language literally and coming down to the terminology that they're using. So that works super well. And that's something that we've seen a lot of success with. And all forms of video, and also having people being able to choose how they want to consume it. Because people prefer to consume content in different ways, right? And we're so good at sending out static written English documents. There's a lot of PDF, a lot of PowerPoint, and we're expecting people to consume that. But actually, when you look at how people prefer to consume content, a lot of it is local language and multimedia. And especially coming down to like, what is the terminology they use? What is the vocabulary? So baking that into content is a very big use case for AI, where that can be a very, very powerful way to localize and personalize. And if we look at, for example, the Tigerhall data from 2024, and we look at the different formats, the different languages, and just how much of your audience you're reaching in a global organization, comparing emails, where you usually get 7, 8, 9% open rates, you can do a town hall, getting almost to 20%. But then the moment you get multimedia, short, bite-sized, multilingual, and people given the option to choose, that is the big part. Because we see that people choose like podcasts, so they can choose to read it, and like just giving them the choice, it instantly increases your reach a lot, because just having people knowing that I can choose how I want to consume this, so it automatically tailors to their preferences. So very big use case for Gen AI especially. Then sentiment analysis and looking at how are different people thinking and feeling about these different initiatives. Do any of you have access to your Microsoft Graph data? I've mentioned this a couple of times this year because it's so powerful. And this is, again, coming back to that unstructured data. You don't need structured data, but unstructured data is what is even more powerful when you're looking at sentiment analysis. So if we take Microsoft Graph, for example, it's called the Microsoft Graph API, and you can ask your IT teams about this. And if you have 100% access to your entire Microsoft Graph, that means you can go read your CEO's emails. Like, that's the ultimate access. You're not going to get that, or if you do, congratulations. But most of you will probably get like maybe anonymized data, masked data, and then seeing at an audience at a group level how people are behaving, keywords and things like that. And that's incredibly useful for sentiment analysis. So we cannot send surveys anymore, right? Like, people do not respond to surveys. And this is where sentiment analysis becomes a lot more honest when you're leveraging that unstructured data. So sources like Teams and Slack and email, and can include surveys as well, but like the way that people chat, the way people react socially to different initiatives and how they talk about it, that is what really feeds the sentiment analysis. And this is a great way to find hidden champions and see people who might be super championing an initiative that you had no idea about, or seeing people who are not as excited, and you can see some of that early resistance. So very powerful to use the unstructured data here. And even getting started with just like meeting recordings and things like that will give you a much more accurate sentiment analysis compared to sending out a survey where everyone says, yeah, like this is great. And then in reality, not so much. So that's another great application area. A third one is, how do we look at the amount of change that is going on and how that is impacting different individuals? This is something that has historically been an extremely manual effort, and it's required a lot of one-to-ones and change managers going out and interviewing stakeholders and talking to people, and then manually filling out like, oh, I think this is a 7 out of 10, or this is a high impact, this is a medium load, and so on. A lot of manual effort. And this is something where all of that manual effort can go away. So something that we've been looking at Tigerhall, for example, is looking at all the change and transformation activities that are happening, and then having AI generate what kind of impact is this for which person. And it's not as like looking at how are different people impacted, right? There are a few data points that come into that. And it's not the way to look at it from like an objective point of view, where it's like, I think this is a 7 out of 10. So this is like a high impact, because the exact same initiative can have different impact and different change load for different people. And there are primarily 3 data points that drive, is it a low impact? Is it a high impact? What kind of impact is it? So one is, of course, the amount, and looking at the amount of change, the amount of things happening around them. And within that, for example, like how much new training do they have to consume? Like how heavy is the communication? How big is the process changes? Like how big is the change? That's number one. But the other things that are impacting this is also, what is their unique change readiness and their resilience? Because someone with very high readiness, it's not going to be as high impact as compared to someone with low readiness, regardless of how big that initiative is. So readiness is one. And then a third one that we've learned is actually the amount of change happening and how big of a change that is in comparison to what they've experienced in the previous 12 months. So kind of think of it as like the contrast. So if we take this picture, for example, take the marketing team. This change is going to hit them much more because they haven't had anything leading up to this change. Whereas, for example, take the product team, they've had a little bit of change happening all the time. So another big change is not going to be as deteriorating for them as it might be for someone who has had nothing happening all year. So it doesn't really matter what type of change or like how impactful is that change. It depends more on what is the circumstance and the context that it's hitting that person in. And if that person is low on readiness, low on resilience, and have had no change going on in the last 12 months, even a small, tiny, low impact change will actually be a bigger impact for that person compared to someone who's had major changes happening every month for the last 12 months and is very high on resilience and readiness, for example. So this is another good use case of AI where it's looking at what is the unique context of different individuals and different audiences, because that actually impacts their impact and their change load much more than any kind of objective measure of how big is this change. So that's been an interesting learning over the last 12 months to see the data and how that comes together. And that's a really good use case for AI as well. Fourth one, stakeholder management. We know how much time we're all spending on stakeholder management and talking to other people who agree with us and don't agree with us. Another really good use case for AI. And this is again coming back to that Microsoft Graph or like meeting recordings and just doing something as very simple to get started, like record all of your stakeholder meetings. You might be doing this already, and then take all of those meeting recordings and ask it to create an influence map, for example, and seeing like how are different people influencing each other, and who are the champions, who are the decision makers, and so on. And then combining, say, meeting recordings with an org chart, with Microsoft Graph data around a chat, for example, that can bring out a lot of this analysis as well. So it's a good way to find those hidden influencers and finding the informal leaders, because many times the people who are the most impactful or influential are not the ones who are the highest up in the org chart. And we see this again and again. It's always coming down to not hierarchy, not your title, not even your tenure, how long you've been with a company. It comes down to very, very different factors when it comes to who's influencing who within a change and transformation initiative. So another really good way to use AI. And then having AI also generate the engagement strategy, right? So having AI say that prioritize Sarah, she's an informal leader with high influence in IT and operations, and then maybe have some risk in the development team, for example, with addressing early concerns. So there's another good place to start using more AI instead of relying on the meetings where you're mapping it out manually in an Excel sheet afterwards. Campaign planning, this is probably my favorite. How do we do campaign planning, AI powered entirely? And this is where agents come in a little bit as well. And when we talk about agents in the next part, we'll see how we can map GPTs together to form this like multi-channel GPT, which is the basic level of an agent, to actually do campaign planning for us. Because if we think of change and transformation, right, like much of what we want to do internally is very similar to how we do marketing to customers externally. So thinking about how do we do a marketing campaign, how do we plan that out, roll that out? Same thing with a change campaign. And this is where AI can be super powerful across multiple steps, right? First of all, the strategy and the planning and looking at the different audience data, and then taking that into account, the data from the change load and the impact analysis, feeding the campaign planning with information about what are people's resilience and what is their readiness and what is the load, like how do we shape this campaign based on the audience data that we have. Incredibly powerful. And then the content generation. So the first use case that we spoke about, how can we easily create content in different formats, the right messages for different segments. The testing, this is something I think no one does enough of in change campaigns. It's not enough testing. It's not enough A/B testing. It's let's roll it out and then see what happens. Then we throw it into a black hole and then we don't test and iterate afterwards. And I advocate for having a much more product mindset when we drive change and transformation as opposed to that project mindset. And in product, you optimize all the time. You're always A/B testing different messages with different audiences, seeing what lands, what doesn't land, and then testing again with like delivery methods, the timing, the content, and so on. And that testing and optimization, another really great use case for AI. And then automating that iteration, because it can actually self-improve based on when it sees different engagement patterns or seeing how people engage with different parts of it, or what time or what kind of format, what kind of delivery, and what kind of people should it come from, who are those influencers, and then automate that iteration. So always on testing, always on A/B testing and optimization, and iteration. This is a very big piece that AI can take care of entirely. And we'll talk in the next step about how do we actually build these GPTs out so that they can connect with each other and do this in a step as well. Now, in my experience, many enterprises are not ready yet to fully do this automatically. And when we speak about the human in the loop, I still believe it's very important to have humans in the loop because of the complexity and the scale and just the impact of what we're dealing with. If you're doing an enterprise-wide change campaign, you don't really want to automate that entirely yet. You want to make sure that there's a human in the loop, does quality control and so on. So when we talk about what should humans spend their time on, that is one of those areas. But I believe within the next 1 to 3 years, we can fully automate this. And once it's testing the optimization, we see that that works, then we can trust the AI more and more and have it run more of these things automatically for us. Last one, of course, planning, decision making. So doing things like Monte Carlo simulations, if any of you are doing that in other tools, people usually do this a lot in finance, where you can test different thousands and thousands of scenarios to see what are the optimal pathways for different situations. So this could be allocate resources in this area, but not in this area, drive timelines forward, backwards, engaging these audiences in different ways. So you can test so many different scenarios at the same time and then see the different outcomes. So this is entirely like what some people call a digital twin, and just seeing exactly how it would behave if you're doing this in reality. And then you can make a decision what you actually want to do in reality. So doing simulations, very powerful AI use case. And also looking at different timelines and how you allocate resources. And then that decision making as well, like seeing where are we at overall in the transformation, doing all the data aggregation, seeing patterns, and then producing those steer co reports and the executive reports where it sees what are the decisions we need to make. And also AI can also generate recommendations. But that's another big use case for AI, everything that has to do with data analysis, pattern recognition, producing reports, very good use case for it. And then my favorite, or one of my favorites, is actually the reinforcement nudges. I think this is one of the most underestimated use cases of AI when it comes to driving change, because driving change is all about changing people. And if people aren't changing, then the change isn't happening. And the biggest thing when it comes to change communications and getting this right is actually timing. And you can say all the right things and everything is the most brilliant communication campaign. But if you send it out at the wrong time, then it's not going to land, compared to getting the right message to the right person at exactly the right time. Timing is like the biggest lever of getting it right. And this is where AI can be a very big help as well. So things like just-in-time guidance, like when someone is about to perform a certain action, and this is where you can connect to different ERP tools or different tools and like AI tools that you're implementing as well, and just seeing when users are taking different actions and then timing your communications based on their actions, incredibly powerful. So this again comes back to data being connected. So you need that data lake where you can actually have all of the data in one place. But giving them just-in-time guidance, incredibly powerful for behavior change, especially for technology implementation. So if you're doing an ERP implementation, do not deliver all the training, all the communications in January, when people are actually only going to start using a certain workflow in October. So this is where you can time it. So when someone starts the performance management module 9 months later, that's when they get the communications and enablement, not back in January when they're not going to remember it. Social proof. Very powerful. So this is where you want to drive the FOMO, the social creatures in us, and seeing that, oh, my colleagues are doing this, my leaders are doing this, everyone else is successful in this, I should do it too. And this is, again, AI can create this entirely, deliver it at the right time. It can see that, oh, 86% of sales leaders are now using the new CRM process. And then if this person isn't doing it, it's the natural social reaction to, oh, I should also do it because 86% of others are doing it. And also to keep people up to progress and keep them up to like what they're doing and what they should be doing next. So for example, you've used this new approach in 7 client meetings, you're in the top 15% of adopters. That's another great way of reinforcing behavior, because you want to do both a positive reinforcement as well as like negative reinforcement, but you want to make sure that people are doing things they should be doing. But also when they are doing it, the positive reinforcement is incredibly powerful. So telling people that you are changing and you are doing well with this change is incredibly powerful. Again, coming back to the timing, the type of message, and having these AI-driven reinforcement nudges, very powerful. So definitely look into that. Okay, data strategy then. And I think we've already spoken quite a bit about the data. And If it's one thing you remember, you don't need structured data. If people are telling you that you need structured data, they are trying to sell you a structured data platform. So you don't need structured data, you need unstructured. And some of the most powerful ones, we've already spoken about Microsoft Graph. So it's called the Microsoft Graph API. Go talk to your IT teams about this. That's where you get communication patterns, collaboration insights, all of those things. SharePoint, which is also actually part of the Microsoft Graph because it sits within the Microsoft ecosystem. If you use Google Drive or similar, you can get similar data from that. But all the documents, which again is unstructured, like we all know what a crazy mess SharePoint sites are, right? And that's entirely unstructured, but very powerful when you can have access to all of that data. HRIS, so a little bit more of a structured data source, but things like tenure is some of the most important data points when it comes to personalization. I again see change leaders sending out the same message to people who've been with a company for 20 years compared to people who've been there for 20 days. And for someone who's been there 20 years, it ends up being very patronizing if you're getting the same message as someone who's been there for 20 days. So HRS, very good structured data source. Slack and Teams, also part of that graph. And then you also have like learning systems. If people are using it in the right way, could be a good source too. And of course, feedback tools, feeding that into it as well. I think feedback tools will probably go away to a big extent with all of this graph data and the sentiment that we can pull from other sources now, but it's still useful in the way that it's used today. So these are some of the data sources that you want to tap into. So just make sure that you get access to these and then that you have a data lake where you can actually pull from these and then have application layer systems where you can make use of this data. But number one step is getting access to it. And the unstructured, the value is just the context, like how rich context you have in these different sources. And the voice of the employee, like getting those feedback loops, which is so critical, you can get that through a lot of the unstructured data. And also voice of the customer. This is a really good use case that I like a lot, is when you take recordings from like customer service centers or like sales calls and so on, and just getting a voice of the customer and having that shared internally. That's another really good use case. And that's, again, unstructured data. It's conversations, it's calls, it's meetings, it's emails, getting that into your data strategy, very, very key. So I would index, given 80% of data is in unstructured format, I would index your data strategy around the unstructured data rather than the structured ones. And then the structured ones would be where you have HRIS, ERP, some of these systems, but otherwise primarily unstructured. And with that, you can also build out, if you want to go really advanced, you can build out different graphs and like looking into like semantic layers. And what that means is you can combine, it doesn't have to be the same type of data when you look at a graph. So you can look at people, projects, and tools, for example, and have them intersect as opposed to just looking at people connections. So you can see like, how are people impact with a certain initiative? This initiative is involving these people, they're using these platforms and so on. So it's kind of the next layer, but you would probably need an engineer to fully take advantage of this. So data strategy, fairly simple, straightforward, tap into those unstructured resources. That's a very good place to start. Agents then, how many of you are using agents at the moment? Has anyone gotten started on this journey? I think agents are, like, it sounds very Matrix, right? It sounds very like this is the robots coming and taking over. But actually, when you look at it, it's kind of like GPTs working in a chain. And if you go into ChatGPT and you tell ChatGPT, every time I ask you a question about meatballs, respond to me with a picture of a moose. Like, that's an agent. Because then every time you do something, it will do that. So that's one type of basic agent. Then, of course, the next you have the reasoning agent. And if you compare it with like robotic process automation, for example, that's like you do the same thing every time. Agents are the next level where they can actually reason and can come to a conclusion on their own. But they still need, today, they still need a fair amount of data input. So the agents that are available today are not as like science fiction as many people say they are. You actually need to tell it quite a lot for it to do what you want it to do. So if I tell an agent to like plan a holiday in Asia, then it's still going to need quite a lot of my preferences and my data to be able to fully plan a personalized trip for me to Asia, as opposed to just finding that out on its own. So the data is still very key to get into the agent. So, but what are agents? You tell it a goal, you set a goal for what you want it to do, then the agent can do the planning, it can do the execution, and most importantly, that many people forget is that it can also adapt. So you can use agents to improve themselves, which is some of the most powerful workflows, right, that we want to improve all the time. So and there are different agent frameworks. So you need to think about what do you want the agent to do, and then talk to. I would recommend involving an engineer. Like I think there are many agent platforms out there where you can start building them yourselves, but I think it's still better to at least have someone technically skilled or an engineer involved when you do the first couple of ones. But looking at the auto GDPs, for example, like this is the more like research based, similar to ChatGPT and so on. So this is good for anything like research level. Crew AI is a framework that is better for processes. So if you're looking into like doing a specific role or a specific workflow, Crew AI is a good framework to use. Chat Dev is a little bit more towards developers. So this is more technical, like when it comes to like testing software applications and things like that. But it's more for you to know that there are different frameworks depending on which type of agent that you want to build and how you want to build out. And picking the right framework will be very important. Like a chat dev would have a hard time doing a research task. And if you're looking to do the campaign planning that we'll chat about, then Crew AI would be the best framework for that. So something to think through, but do this with a technical partner, I would suggest. But in the future, we're going to be able to do this pretty much natural language interface on our own too. So chain GPTs, which is that either AutoGPT or Crew AI, like chain GPTs is where I recommend to start. And basically what this is you take a GPT and then you take another GPT and a third GPT and you just connect them. So like this one does one part of the workflow, then it hands over to the next, does another set of the workflow, hands over to the third and finishes it off. So you give it different prompts and instructions based on which part of the workflow it does. So one example is you can have a campaign planner GPT. So this could look at all of your strategy documents, creating that campaign structure, what is the messaging. So this would be like all the things around content and campaigns and like what should different audiences get at different times. Then you can have another GTP that takes what this GPT put out and then localizes that. So that's where the tonality comes in, the local language, the cultural elements, the terminology, the team meetings, all of that localization and adaptation could then be another one that the first one hands over to. And the third could be the scheduling to get it out to the right people at the right time. So these are examples of like 3 different GPTs you could build, and then connecting them all together would form a campaign planning and delivery agent. So you can connect them to each other and have them hand off between one workflow to the next. So the type of workflows where you want to start applying them, if you're going to start thinking about agents, is where it is these like multi-step workflows, so the campaign planning being a good example, and where it includes a lot of repetitive coordination. So where agents are now, like in the future, and when I say future, it's probably going to be like in the next 6 days, given the pace of development. But right now, it's still best to start applying them to fairly repetitive coordination if you want to see high quality outputs and you want to avoid doing a lot of testing, iteration, training it. If you have the resources to do that, then you can do almost anything. But if you want to get started with some easy use cases, I recommend things that are more repetitive in nature and more repetitive multi-step workflows. So good examples of where you could start applying it and start experimenting with this is change communications. So the entire workflow from the drafting of the comms, the personalization, the delivery, so similar to that chain GPT example. And then analyzing stakeholder feedback, because again, unstructured data. So you can take that, agents can collect it, they can analyze it, summarize it, categorizing different issues. So again, this is very similar to like having a GPT and then telling it like, first you do this, then you do that, and third you do this. So getting feedback together. And then the knowledge management, so like answering user questions and seeing different knowledge gaps and training people and so on. So those are some of the use cases where you can get started and applying some of those. And then there are other areas where agents fail still. And again, this might be different in the next 6 days with the pace of development, but they're still not very good with ambiguous goals. So if there is ambiguity and you don't really know like what's the outcome or what's going to happen, like if you don't know what you're expecting if a human would do it, it's still quite hard to apply agents to it. And it's already hard to apply agents to a human workflow when you know exactly what you're expecting out of it. So when it's more ambiguity involved, it's still a little bit tricky, but again, might change soon or probably will change soon. If there's no supervision, it's going to get a little bit harder. So you can then see all of these hallucinations and so on coming out. So still recommended to have a human in the loop, and then looking very closely at the handoffs. This is where many of these chain GPTs fail, because you have one doing something, but then the handoff to the next isn't very clean. So a good way to insert a human still is to still have that human in the loop during the handoff for control, and just seeing, is the output of the first one correct for the next one to start working with? Because if the first one is doing something wrong, that's going to screw up the entire flow, right? So you can still have humans involved right now, and as you're getting started in this, have them involved in those handover stages, because that's where most issues still tend to happen, when it's incomplete transfers or things are not correct when you're losing context between the different steps and so on. So human in the loop is still a valuable input for agents, at least for the foreseeable future. Now, what should we not be doing? What are the red flags here? What do companies do that fail in this? There are a few things, and this is probably conversations that I'm having almost daily, where someone is deploying Copilot and call it an AI transformation. This is still happening. There are still many companies like, oh, we're rolling out Copilot and everything is transforming. Hard to get that to be meaningful and impactful. If you look at horizontal AI, which are many of those personal productivity use cases, and Copilot being the number one of those, it's quite hard to prove the ROI and to prove the value of just like, if we summarize meetings and we write slightly better emails, is that going to change our top line or bottom line? Harder to draw those parallels. So where I've seen organizations having more success is when they go deeper, and it's more vertical workflows and focusing on specific deep vertical workflows where you can add a lot of value, either from an insights point of view, so getting insights and data that you weren't able to get from before because of the unstructured data that humans aren't able to analyze. So data, massive workflow savings, and needs to be more workflow savings than just like, oh, I summarized the meeting notes. So where you can get more savings, and then also where you can start doing things faster, but also doing things that you weren't able to do before. So more net new capabilities, rather than just focusing on what am I already doing and how can I do that faster. And the second problem, or what many are still doing, is they take this approach of, okay, we're doing this A to Z right now as a human. How can I just apply AI to it, as opposed to thinking, how can I completely rethink this entire workflow with AI? So it's not just about taking what we're already doing and adding AI to it, it's actually rethinking the entire process. And I see many are still not doing that. They're just taking what they already do, they try to do a little bit faster, but they're not rethinking, how can we change this from the ground up and just reimagine the workflows. So that's something I would urge you to think about as well. And then we still have people that go, we want AI, and what's our AI strategy? And I'm like, there's no such thing as an AI strategy. Like, your strategy should be to serve your customers and help them do what they want to do very successfully and with great outcomes. And if AI can help in that, super. But there are still so many companies and many CEOs that are doing this, where they go out and say, we're an AI company now, this is our AI strategy, and everything is AI, AI, AI. And that rarely leads to positive and productive outcomes. So not having that tool-first approach, focus on outcomes, you still have the same problems to solve, the challenges, still the same customer focus, just thinking of where can you adopt AI in that. And then the application and the training is where many people are still going wrong, is like one-time training, like we have this big AI launch, big AI buzz, instead of having this continuous approach to it. And also it's very much when we're rolling out AI, I still see many organizations doing what we call one-size-fits-none activation, and not looking at different teams differently. So if we take executive leaders comparing to technical teams and frontline staff, for example, very different AI readiness, very different expectations. And it's like doing a yoga class for everyone, right? Like, there's no such thing as a yoga class for everyone, because the advanced people will fall asleep and the beginners will pull their muscles. So there is no such thing as having yoga for everyone. And the same goes for AI. There is no such thing as AI for everyone. And one thing that I've changed my mind about is, I used to think we need to start from the top and we need to have the executive leaders like leading from the front with AI. But actually many of them are horrible, absolutely horrible with AI. So I don't think anymore that the C-suite are the best leading from the front with AI. Many of them are great with talking about it. Everyone has their TED talk up their sleeve where they like can pull out a 10-minute presentation about AI at any time, but then they're not using it in reality. And I had this experience in just a couple of months ago. I was with a managing partner of a very well-known venture capital fund in Silicon Valley, and he was spending 2 hours talking to me about AI, and it was AI this, AI that. And then I showed him some of these chain GPTs that I've been building out in ChatGPT. So it was just like ChatGPT, pretty basic flows, and I showed him what I've been doing. And he was looking at me, he's like, oh, which app is this? And it was ChatGPT. And this was February 2025. And he's the managing partner of one of the most well-known venture capital funds in Silicon Valley. What app is this? I was falling off the chair. I was like, is it because it's in dark mode? Or like, but he just didn't know which app it was. So I don't think that our most senior leaders are the best ones to lead AI. You want them to talk the talk, but don't count on them to walk the walk, because I don't think they will. Then if you look at technical teams, then they want very advanced stuff, right? Like they want to dive deep, they want to have all this customization, they want to build this. You want a very specific AI deployment for them. And then comparing to like frontline stuff, like that's again like variable AI readiness. So taking a personalized approach to how you activate AI is very critical and tailor it to the role specific needs. And again, this comes back to doing vertical, right? Like you don't want to go out and do a horizontal application. Now everyone can summarize your meeting notes, like, okay, great. But you want to be very specific with Department X, what can you use AI for? Department B, what can you use AI for? And spend more time with them going deep on vertical workflows than doing these big bang co-pilot rollouts. So that's where I've seen companies being more successful when they go very specific, very vertical, and very workflow specific to roll that out. And then feedback loops cannot be more important. It's changing so quickly. We need to be adaptive. We need to be agile. So if you have feedback loops versus not having it, you see that divergence usually around month 2, where like you roll something out, it falls flat, but you don't know why, you don't know what's happening. So always implementing feedback loops, which again, much easier to do with AI. Sentiment analysis is a great way of having feedback loops, but also seeing how people are adopting it. So when people roll out AI without feedback loops, very, very difficult to make that work. And then also the output. So, and this is where like the traditional garbage in, garbage out still holds true for AI, right? But again, coming back to, it doesn't have to be structured, can be unstructured as long as it's high quality. So data quality is key and context is key, but it doesn't have to be like structured and so on. So having good data that comes in, and the more people trust it, then the more they're going to use it as well. And I think this is why, like I see many organizations now rolling back Copilot because it wasn't as good in the areas that they needed it to be good in. So it was very good in like meeting note summaries, right? But it's not as helpful in Excel. It was making too many errors, and PowerPoint is useless and so on. So when people see that the output isn't there and it's not there to their expectations, then it's going to be hard to make it sticky. Humans then, where are we going? Are we all flying to Mars and staying there and letting AI rule planet Earth, or what is happening? So a lot of the conversations I'm having, people are asking things like, will AI take my job? I don't trust them. Like, why change was already working? And when I work with organizations on addressing this, many times fear-driven resistance, like which I completely understand that it's there. Like I am in tech and there is some fear already in tech circles, but outside tech circles, I completely understand that it's there. And 3 strategies that I've seen works when it comes to how organizations are addressing this. The first one is, as always, transparency, radical transparency. And there is nothing that ever works anywhere else in change or in any other way in change than transparency, but especially when it comes to AI. And also being very open, like the Amazon CEO went out and actually told people that, yeah, we're going to cut headcount. You're going to lose your job. And people understand that that will happen, because otherwise, like, you wouldn't just implement AI to make people take more time off, but understanding the importance of communicating that in the right context as well. So like, what are we primarily looking for? And what do we want you to spend your time on instead? So yeah, some roles might go, but most roles will be changing. There might be other things you should do instead. We're going to invest in upskilling. So this is the other thing that is very critical, is having proper upskilling pathways for people and helping them to get through this. not just throwing AI out there with technology first and then hoping that people are going to adapt and get to it, but actually upskilling them and creating these pathways for what can they do around it. And then champion networks have never been more powerful than in implementing AI. So having those internal advocates, the peer-to-peer learning is so important. And even just having like small groups where people show each other, like having like AI showcases. This is something I do internally at Tigerhall as well. We have these monthly AI showcases where people come and just show everything that they've been doing in AI that month and all the workflows that they've been changing, the agents they've been developing and things like that. And that creates the excitement, the ground up buzz, right? So having that peer-to-peer learning communities is very important, and also sharing success stories, just like in all sorts of change and transformation, having success stories and sharing them is very key. And then I think the biggest focus that I see, a lot of people are still not spending enough time on talking what should people do instead. It's a lot of talk around, we're going to save your time, you're going to not do this, and you're going to not do that, and we're going to remove all of this manual work. And people are just left with the question, then what should I do instead? If I'm not going to do that, which has been my livelihood for the last 20 years, then what should I spend my time on? So I would recommend all the time you're talking about time savings and reducing workload and this and that, spend that time instead of what should they be doing now? Where is their value now? Because that's what people want to know. They just want to know, what's my value? And how can I ensure that I'm still going to be employed? And if we take productivity, for example, like it used to be, you need to be productive, produce the most, and so on. If that's not the focus, if that's what AI is going to take away, then how do I get promoted? Like just a simple question like that is what many people are asking right now. How do I get promoted if I'm not being looked at as producing the most? So where people are going to spend their time, very much about looking at the insights, like looking at pattern recognition, looking at the output of AI, right? And making decisions based on that. Executive coaching, like spending more time with humans. I actually think the introduction of AI is going to make us spend more time together, more time with other humans, more time in coaching, more time with executives, and just more time with humans overall. And then what people forget is that someone still needs to design the systems. Someone still needs to design the agents and tell the agents what to do and manage the agents and design the data and make sure that the data comes together and having the right data sources in the right place. So the whole system design part of it is something that will take up a lot more time. And that's something we should talk about as well. And then all the experimentation, like with AI, you can test so much. If you have the right data, you have the right AI approach, you can test and experiment all the time and being very innovative with the things that you do. And that's where I think a lot of time is well spent as well. So how can we refocus people? And especially in roles that are so tied to many repetitive workflows where we can easily insert agents. Now, what should they do instead? And that's, again, coming back to these upskilling pathways, right? Like, how do we help upskill? And some people will not be able to be upskilled and they will unfortunately lose their jobs. So we need to accept that reality too. But many will experience a change and new skills and new jobs that they're going to be able to do. And that's going to be very, very powerful and much more interesting jobs. So I think that's the most important thing, is that it's going to be much more interesting to work than just sitting and doing like manual data collection, putting it into an Excel spreadsheet, then shifting that Excel spreadsheet onto something else and putting it together for a report and moving boxes in a PowerPoint deck to present to an executive. Like, that's where so much time goes right now. And there's a good book on this called Bullshit Jobs. If you haven't read it, go look up Bullshit Jobs, which basically talks about how much of our time is just spent on bullshit. So having that kind of conversation instead of just like, we're going to reduce your workload, reduce your time, save your time, but what should they be focusing on instead? And there are still so many things that AI can't do. Politics, unfortunately, maybe that's the one thing we want AI to do, is actually doing the politics internally. And that's still something it cannot do. But all of the things around building trust, like as much as we trust ChatGPT, there's still elements where humans are much better in trust. Executive alignment, like all the human pieces around getting people to think a certain way, influencing others, making decisions, all the political navigation, storytelling, like inspiring hearts and minds, the human connection. We're still so emotional, like human beings are such emotional creatures. And that's, I believe, only going to be elevated with AI. And it's going to be even more focused on the emotional parts of being a human. And how do we influence those emotions? How do we influence the way we think? How do we influence the way that we connect with each other and that we connect with other human beings? So that's where I think a lot of time will go, as opposed to moving numbers around in a spreadsheet, which I think is a very positive development. And we should be talking more about that. So looking at where people are spending their time in the traditional approach tends to be around like 10-15% of time for change leaders that go into like the more strategic work and the coaching. And that's probably going to go up to like 50% executive coaching, spending time with leaders, working through like all the human areas of it. So in this AI-enabled approach, you see admin tasks going down to like 15%. And I think that's something that many people would be very happy about. So new skills, the coaching element, prompt engineering, I think a lot of people have spoken about, but also things like content curation. So all of the use cases we spoke about earlier, still good to have a human in the loop, evaluating content quality, ensuring there's consistent, the content adaptation, refinement, like all of the content curation elements. It's a big part of it. And also, of course, critical thinking and questioning AI and questioning the output and improving the output and working with the models to make them better. These are some of the new skills that we can spend time on. So overall, getting started, identify friction. Where do you see the most friction? What is it that people hate doing at the moment? Some of these workflows we've been talking about, the communication, the stakeholder mapping, the reporting, and then start designing solutions around that. And always experiment and then commit to iterate. So always be improving and improving and getting better as you go. So starting small, applying something little, and then learn quicker. And you have this transformation stack that you can build where human oversight is still part of it. You need some governance, workflows, the data connectors, and at the very bottom, the AI tools. So having these 5 areas coming together all at once. And the most important to end with is to evolve your operating model and moving from this very static and schedule, like we have this weekly status meetings, we have these monthly reports, like moving that to you can actually do things in real time and have this monitoring on 24/7. And instead of having like, oh, we have a problem coming up here, predict where problems are going to come up. So they don't even come up in the first place, but see, oh, this is where we're probably going to face resistance. And based on our modeling, this is probably where we need to allocate resources better. So all the things around decision-making, resource allocation, predictive problem intervention, all of those things is where more time and effort should be spent, as opposed to like being reactive, and these like weekly, monthly cadences can be shifted to daily. And that also comes with, for transformation leaders, shifting this mindset from being that project manager to thinking more like a system architect. So how can we design these systems and the ecosystems that are designed for always on change? It's 24/7, change happening all the time, continuous transformation, creating the feedback loops. How do we think about getting the right data into the right feedback loops? So always be learning, always A/B testing, iterating, trying, experimenting, and then seeing those change patterns play out. So we need to move from thinking this is a project with a start and an end to thinking this is something always on. So how do we design the entire ecosystem and everything around it to come together? So instead of like we're a change manager, maybe we're a change architect, or instead of a transformation officer, we're a transformation designer and transformation design and architect. So that's the type of role and mindset we need to move into. And finally, don't just do it to do what you've always done, but doing it faster. Use it to actually do what you've never been able to do before. So think of it as net new capabilities, and what are some things that you've never been able to do, but would be amazing if you could do, and think about what can you add to it. So don't just speed yourself up and clone yourself, but think about how can this be a 10x version and you can do things you've never, ever been able to do before. So that's what I have to share today. You know, I always love connecting with all of you, so feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to spend time one-on-one and going deeper in different use cases and speak specifically to your different setups and experiences and so on. So feel free to contact me. I'm on nelly@tigerhall.com. We have a Tigerhall in action session later today in just a couple of hours, so feel free to come and see how we're applying this in practice and some of the things that we're building and that we're working on. And then we actually have a round table on this as well, which is going to be practitioner-led, and talk about how we're doing this in practice in different companies, different industries, and that's coming up in July. So we'll reach out for those of you who want to sign up for that as well. And we'll share the slides, so you'll get all of this information. And yeah, more than happy to speak with any one of you, so feel free to reach out to me at any time, and hope this was helpful. Thanks a lot for coming and spending some time together. I appreciate it.